Southern Florida holds more than 6 million people in just 3 counties, while vast stretches of the north remain oddly empty, even though it was once Florida's beating heart. A railroad tycoon, a devastating freeze, and 20th century engineering all tilted the odds southward. But how did ancient Spanish settlements lose out? And what did it cost the North? Let's unravel the chain reaction that turned the state upside down. St. Augustine began as a Spanish outpost in 1565, carved from the northern Florida coast long before the first English colony at Jamestown. Soldiers, priests, and farmers built their lives behind coquina walls, wary of pirates and rival empires. The Spanish crown poured resources into this northern stronghold, raising missions and fortresses across the region. The Castillo de San Marcos, with its thick stone ramparts, still stands as a reminder of centuries spent defending the coast against British raids and Seminole resistance. The land north of the St. Johns River became a patchwork of plantations and military outposts. Cotton and indigo grew in the sandy soil, worked by enslaved people on estates that stretched for miles. By the early 1800s, the territory was known less for its beaches and more for its fields and forts. The culture that took root here mirrored the Old South, conservative, agrarian, and fiercely guarded. These settlements, spaced far apart, depended on rivers and dirt roads to connect them to the outside world. Trade moved slowly, and the pace of life followed the seasons, shaped by the rhythms of agriculture and the threat of war. Even as the United States claimed Florida in 1821, the North remained the center of power. Tallahassee, chosen for its halfway point between St. Augustine and Pensacola, became the capital. The region's identity was set, rural, military, and deeply tied to the land. Meanwhile, southern Florida was still wild, untamed marshes, thick forests, and few permanent settlements. For more than 2 centuries, the North defined what it meant to live in Florida. Its towns and plantations anchored the state, while the rest remained frontier. This was the world that later newcomers would have to upend if they wanted to shift the map and the future of Florida. Henry Flagler stepped off the train in St. Augustine with a vision that would redraw Florida's future. By the late 1800s, the North was still the state's center of gravity, but Flagler saw opportunity in the wild, empty stretches farther south. Armed with Standard Oil wealth, he began buying up struggling railroads and stitching them together into the Florida East Coast Railway. The state offered a deal. For every mile of track he laid, Flagler received 3,840 acres of public land, enough to make railroad building not just possible, but wildly profitable. The first major leap came in 1888, when the rails reached Daytona. Flagler did not stop. He pushed south, building grand hotels along the line to lure northern tourists. The Hotel Ponce de Leon in St. Augustine dazzled with electric lights. The Royal Poinciana in Palm Beach became the world's largest wooden hotel, drawing the Gilded Age elite to what had been mosquito-ridden wilderness. Each new stop became a town, each hotel a magnet for settlers and workers. In 1897, the tracks reached Miami, a place so small that the census barely acknowledged it. Flagler built the Royal Palm Hotel on the banks of the Miami River, and suddenly the city had a reason to exist. Miami's population swelled, as the railway brought in everything from construction crews to citrus growers who were eager to escape the frost-prone north. Flagler's gamble did not end the air. By 1912, the rails stretched all the way to Key West, making it possible to travel from Jacksonville to the southernmost point of the continental U.S. by train. Flagler's railway did not just move people, it moved capital, ideas, and ambitions southward, bypassing the old plantation towns and river ports of the north. The Atlantic Coast Corridor became Florida's new backbone. The incentives were clear: land, jobs, and the promise of prosperity. Northern Florida, once the heart of the state, found itself sidelined as the economic engine shifted south, following the iron rails and the fortunes they carried. December 1894 brought a cold that Florida had rarely known. In Tallahassee, the thermometer plunged to 11 degrees Fahrenheit. Jacksonville hit 14 degrees. By sunrise, groves that had covered the northern half of the state were silent and ruined. The first freeze stripped fruit from the trees, but it was the second wave in February 1895 that finished the job, splitting bark, killing roots, and leaving entire orchards gray and lifeless. Citrus production, once the pride of towns from Jacksonville to Orlando, collapsed overnight. 6 million boxes of oranges became a memory. In some counties, more than 21,000 acres yielded nothing. Packing houses shuttered. Families who had spent decades tending groves faced bankruptcy. Diaries from the time speak plainly. Froze my life's work, heading to the Keys where oranges defy winter. For many, there was no choice but to move. The land they left behind lost its value almost instantly. Some packed up for California or the Caribbean, hoping for a fresh start, but thousands turned their eyes south. Pinellas County, with its milder Gulf breezes, suffered little damage. St. Petersburg and nearby settlements, once sleepy, became magnets for growers desperate to rebuild. Budwood from surviving trees traveled south to restart groves, and new communities grew up almost overnight. The Florida East Coast Railway, already snaking its way toward Miami, became the lifeline for this exodus. Flat cars carried not just fruit, but families, tools, and hope. The freeze didn't just change the map of citrus, it changed where people lived and worked. The old towns of the north faded, while the South's promise of frost-free land and easy rail access drew both capital and labor. Agriculture, once rooted in the north, was now anchored to the south. The Great Freeze had turned a rail advantage into a necessity, and the population map of Florida would never look the same. In 1948, the United States approved a plan that would forever change southern Florida's future. The Central and Southern Florida Flood Control Project set out to drain more than 1,000 square miles of wetlands south of Lake Okeechobee. Army engineers dug canals, built levees, and installed water control structures, turning land once considered uninhabitable into fields, suburbs, and towns. The state legislature created a new district to manage the system, and within a decade, land speculators were selling lots on drained muck, promising a new life in the sun. Developers carved out neighborhoods from what had been sawgrass and cypress. By the 1950s, the region's population was climbing, powered by the promise of cheap land and the security of flood control. At the same time, a new web of highways was stitching the peninsula together. Interstate 95 rolled down the east coast, linking Miami to the rest of the Atlantic seaboard. Interstate 75 cut through the interior and west, connecting Tampa and Orlando to the Midwest. These routes funneled newcomers south, bypassing the slower, less accessible towns of the north. State planners and federal officials favored southern alignments, betting on the ports and beaches that could drive economic growth. Census records from the 1960s show migration rates in southern counties outpacing the north by 3-1. Opportunity was not just about land and roads. After 1959, Miami became a gateway for waves of Cuban exiles fleeing Castro's revolution. By the early 1980s, hundreds of thousands had arrived, opening businesses, launching factories, and remaking the city's economy. Haitian and Puerto Rican families followed, drawn by jobs and family networks. Their energy turned Miami into a city of newcomers, where immigrants built fortunes and neighborhoods from scratch. Meanwhile, northern Florida's economy still leaned on agriculture and military bases, industries prone to boom-bust cycles and slow to attract outside investment. When military spending dipped, towns like Pensacola and Panama City felt the sting. The South, by contrast, kept drawing people in, each new arrival reinforcing the momentum of growth and making it harder for the North to catch up. Florida's population map isn't just history, it's a blueprint shaping who gets opportunity, investment, and resilience against crisis. As Southern growth strains resources and climate risks climb, where people live will decide who thrives. The state's future still pivots on who stays, who moves, and who gets left behind.